Since at least the 1920s, the Boy Scouts of America maintained a secret archive known internally as the Ineligible Volunteer Files. Investigators and journalists who later obtained them called them the Perversion Files. Inside were the names of 7,819 adults accused of sexually abusing children in their care. For decades, those files were never shared with police. When an accusation was deemed credible, executives removed the leader quietly, wrote a thank you letter, and allowed him to walk away. Some walked into other troops. The files documenting abuse across generations were maintained in secret, shredded when convenient, and released only because a court ordered it. The Boy Scouts of America is one of the largest youth organizations in the country, with millions of participants at its peak. Alongside public programs, it ran a parallel, confidential system designed to track leaders accused of abuse. That system's logic protected the institution: investigate internally, remove quietly if necessary, seal the record. The alternative, calling law enforcement, was understood as a threat to reputation. Across decades, the choice was consistent: protect the organization. In 1984, the BSA Executive Board formally directed the organization to continue handling sexual abuse allegations internally. The resolution was explicit. Sexual abuse complaints were to be managed through internal channels, not routinely disclosed to outside authorities. This was not an oversight or gap, it was policy. The consequences are visible in the files. Leaders removed from one troop and documented only to reappear in files from other states. The internal mechanism functioned less as protection for children and more as a transfer system for accused adults. Researchers and attorneys who reviewed the Perversion Files identified 7,819 suspected abusers and approximately 12,254 individual victims documented in the records. Those figures reflect only what the BSA recorded cases, serious enough to generate internal documentation. Experts in institutional abuse emphasize that internal records undercount actual harm. Reporting is uneven, allegations are suppressed, and files can be destroyed. The BSA admitted under oath that it routinely shredded records, guaranteeing that the surviving archive is a fragment of the organization's full history of abuse. BSA executives acknowledged in legal proceedings that files were routinely shredded according to criteria such as the accused being over 80 or presumed deceased. Thousands of files were eliminated. When investigators attempted to reconstruct the scope of abuse, they worked from what survived an active effort to reduce the historical record. The destruction of files is not neutral. It is the elimination of evidence, the erasure of victim stories, and a deliberate narrowing of institutional culpability. The files that remain did so because the campaign to destroy them was incomplete. In October 2012, following a court order in Portland, Oregon, roughly 1,900 files from 1965 to 1985 were made public. For the first time, the public could read what the organization had documented internally about adults it entrusted with children. The files included names, dates, incidents, and institutional responses, letters of dismissal, quiet removals, and concerns about where a removed leader might volunteer next. A later release in 2019 expanded the record to the full 7,819 names, giving survivors documentary confirmation that their experiences were part of a broader pattern. On February 18, 2020, the Boy Scouts of America filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, citing the volume of sexual abuse claims as a principal driver. The filing listed roughly 92,700 sexual abuse claims from survivors nationwide. Decades of suppressed history surfaced through a single legal mechanism. The bankruptcy process provided a framework for compensating survivors, yielding a settlement of about $2.46 billion. Many survivors and advocates argued those awards were inadequate relative to the harm endured. The proceedings also raised complex questions about accountability among local councils and sponsoring organizations that had not filed for bankruptcy. The vast majority of the 7,819 men named in the files were never prosecuted. Many are deceased. For survivors whose abusers are alive, statutes of limitations in most states had expired long before the files were public. The executives who maintained the filing system, who drafted the 1984 policy, and who chose institutional preservation over reporting, were not criminally charged for those decisions. The BSA paid civil settlements, reorganized and issued statements of reform. The institution absorbed financial cost, individuals largely avoided criminal consequences, The legacy is mixed. The bankruptcy reorganization produced new leadership and updated child protection policies, mandatory 2-adult leadership, youth protection training, and prohibitions on one-on-one adult-youth contact. The organization abandoned the policy of handling allegations solely through internal files. Yet those reforms arrived only after decades of concealment, only after courts forced files into public view, and only after survivors pushed the legal system to acknowledge what the institution had concealed. 7,819 names, 12,254 documented victims, decades of sealed files, a formal policy directing executives not to call the police, systematic shredding of evidence, and when the courts compelled disclosure, 92,700 claims filed by survivors who had waited for the system to acknowledge what it had concealed. The Boy Scouts of America did not fail to protect children by accident. It built and maintained a system to protect itself. The children were the cost of that choice, and they paid it for generations. Subscribe to Case Files TV because when an institution chooses reputation over a child's safety, every file it seals is a decision it made.